Thanks, everyone. Photo just there was my 40th birthday party. So it always triggers a slightly sort of PSD moment in me. But yeah, I'm Tom Parry, Head of Digital Sustainability at Department for the Environment, Farming and Rural Affairs. I work for Chris Howes, who, as people may know, is the Senior Responsible Owner for Digital Sustainability in Government. And was due to be giving this keynote today. So first of all, I want to pass on Chris's apologies that he can't be here. He's got an unavoidable personal appointment, but I do know that he's a really passionate advocate for digital sustainability. And I've seen it firsthand, as many of the people here will have done, how committed he is to prioritising his time and raising the profile of this issue. In DEFRA, he's been very pragmatic and supportive in terms of resourcing for our own team at a time when government recruitment controls and FTE limits are quite sort of tough. Chris is always very generous in making sure that we're resourced and that we've got the people we need to do our work. So Chris, you're really committed to this topic and sorry that he can't be here, but he has seen what I'm going to say and he's endorsed it. So don't worry, you're hearing the kind of the approved version of what we want to talk about. So to start with, great to see people here today from, I think, right across government and the public sector and our supply chain. So really good range of organisations and I think quite a good role of professions and sort of roles and stuff too. We got, I think, software engineers, project specialists, policy colleagues. So a real good mix of people. And as I've already heard about, the agenda's got a really good mix of topics and speakers. So I think probably something for all of us to think about as we go through today, things we're going to take away and put into practice back in our organisations. There are some people speaking later on today who are here right now, and I might just at a certain point ask them to identify themselves so that kind of things join up and make sense. But I just wanted to start by explaining a little bit about Chris and DEFRA's role in the issue. So as well as being DEFRA's Chief Digital and Information Officer, CDIO, so Chris obviously is responsible for DEFRA's own IT, making sure that that is as sustainable as possible. But Chris is also, as I said, the senior responsible owner for the topic across government on behalf of the Digital Centre. So that means he works closely with colleagues in GDS and across the kind of CDIO leadership group. One thing to say about DEFRA kind of holding that position is that I think a lot of our talk today is about limiting the impact of tech on the environment, but obviously DEFRA as a department has a lot of policy interest in environmental outcomes generally. So we also have to think, if we're possible, about how tech is part of the answer to some of this. Within DEFRA, for example, we're seeing how DEFRA is using AI, things like peat restoration, counting penguins, all kinds of interesting stuff that speaks to environmental outcomes. We use the Internet of Things to monitor tree health. There's lots of kind of positive stuff that we can think about and just not only focus on some of the negative impacts, although we're talking about that a lot today. So we have a DEFRA Digital Sustainability team, which has this dual responsibility too. And we're going to focus today probably on the cross-government stuff. And I think it's worth talking about our two main forums that we have to do that. So the first is the cross-government steering group, which really, I'd say in the past year or so, that's kind of come into its own and really been stood up and got into a regular pattern. So that brings together leads from different government departments to agree priorities, coordinate work. And I think you've already heard about some of the speakers today. A lot of those people are on that steering group, and that's a really good way of bringing people together, make sure we're talking about the same things and have got a agreed strategy. But we're conscious this is an issue where we rely on our supply chain to both improve our own performance, but also as a source of innovation and thought leadership. So we run the Government Digital Sustainability Alliance, which now has over 50 organisations in it. That's both suppliers, academic organisations and kind of the wider third sector. And they're a key source of advice to us on the issue, but also so we can share strategy with them and make sure that they hear that stuff in a consistent way from government with one voice. And you can see there some of the organisations that are in that alliance. And there's a few photos of Chris and others speaking at events that we've put on. So I think the point I wanted to get across with this slide is that we have got structures in place now within government and wider to make sure that we are coordinating and kind of sharing knowledge and being consistent as far as possible. If anyone here thinks you should belong to these organisations and aren't in them, then please get in touch with me. I've got the email address there and I'll share it at the end or come and have a chat. But we always will welcome new joiners to both of those. So some of the work that's happening under the auspices of these organisations forums that I talked about. So the first, and this is just a flavour, just to give you a sense of some of the stuff that is happening. First is some work that, in fact, Mark Butcher, who is here. Mark, do you want to put your hand up? So Mark's sat at the back there and is leading some work to look at how we can improve how we report on Scope 3 emissions from the supply chain. And that's been working with both GDSA and that cross-government steering group. That's an important topic that we're working through. Obviously, AI is a real hot topic at the moment. And there's two things to say on that. So James Blackshaw, James, do you want to put your hand up? Yeah, so James is part of our DEFRA team and has, within DEFRA, we've just agreed our own position statement on how DEFRA is going to balance the risks and opportunities for sustainability and AI that will be published, I think, next week, shortly. And that is a kind of, I think, quite a good first step for a government department to be doing something explicit that talks about, how we're going to balance those challenges. But beyond that, we're also looking at kind of how we can weave in some more helpful guidance into kind of general cross-government standards and approaches for AI to make sure that they reflect sustainability a bit more than they do at the moment. And James is tapping into a lot of the expertise in the GDSA to help do that work. And I think we've got a session on that later that we talk about that in more detail. Then improving the technical guidance. So this is something that Ned Gartside in our team. Ned's your turn to put your hand up. Yeah, great. So Ned's there. I'm working with Guy Wolfenden from HMCTS. Guy, just there, on stepping through some of the detail about what it means in practice to make a service or project more sustainable. I think we've got an acknowledged gap at the moment in terms of what guidance there is for people that are working on digital services to actually make their stuff more sustainable. And this work has really been drilling into detail about exactly what that means for every stage of the kind of service life cycle. We're working with GDS to blend that stuff into the service standard and service manual in due course, but we'll also have a product that kind of brings it together that is kind of available all in one place too. But I'm sure Ned and Guy are very happy to have a chat about that if people want to know more. But that is a really good positive step for us to finally have something we can point people towards if they come and say, how do I make my service more sustainable? We're already talking to Synergy, big new cross-government SOP ERP program, about kind of helping them use that product to improve their service. Reporting improvements. So every year we publish an annual report on government's performance, and every year we kind of look at how we can make that process better, how we can improve the template, how we can improve the reporting. Anna Fountain in our team. Is Anna here? Oh, yes. Yeah. Hi, Anna. So Anna leads that. And Anna's leading that bit of work at how we improve that process. Again, if anyone's got any questions, I'm sure Anna's happy to have a chat. So procurement, I think we all will acknowledge that's a really important issue for how we can improve on this point. I've mentioned before how important suppliers are. And we're shortly standing up a working group to look at how we can use procurement more effectively as government overall. We're really pleased that Crown Commercial Service have agreed to kind of lead that bit of work with us, because they're obviously a really important organisation to do that with, and we'll be talking a bit more about that probably in the next couple of months as that work stands up. Then the last two, so circularity and planetary impact, are two groups that our GDSA Supplier Alliance are kind of helping us with in particular, and they're looking at some of the barriers to circularity within government IT at the moment. There's a white paper due out shortly on that topic that they'll be publishing. And planetary impact, looking at how we can go and think about kind of beyond carbon measures in what we do. Hopefully that's given you a bit of a flavour for kind of some of the work that is already underway across government and in our supply chain. But beyond those kind of immediate working groups, we're also working on a new strategy for government sustainable IT. And we want this to set out kind of shared priorities, to define some really clear outputs that are going to be delivered, and also kind of how we're going to measure ourselves, some outcomes. And I think really importantly, confirm who's doing what on this topic, kind of who's responsible for what. At the moment, I think we've got a lot of really passionate people and a lot of good stuff happening, but I think there's a bit of confusion about sometimes how it's organised and who is responsible for it. So that's kind of what the strategy is going to do. But we don't want to just have a strategy for its own sake, and there's a number of reasons that it's important to do it now. So first is, we've already talked about a bit of an inflection point at the moment for some of this stuff. We've got the new digital centre starting to come together. Review into digital government recently published. We've also got the new green government commitments that have been talked about. A new procurement act just come in. There's a lot of things happening at the moment that give us a good opportunity to position ourselves in a consistent and powerful way, but also are a risk that if we haven't got an agreed kind of set of priorities and stuff, that we get a bit lost in all those things and we aren't consistent. Lots of interest and momentum on the topic. So Joanna Davinson, bottom left, she came to an event we put on 2 weeks ago. She's the new government chief digital officer. And she talked about this being an important part of her blueprint for government digital. Secretary of State there, Steve Reed, particular interest in circularity. And that's one of his key sort of 5 missions that he talks about. We've already heard about it being in the manifesto, but he's really keen on it. And we got a meeting due with him a bit later this spring to talk about that. Peter Carl, the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, really keen focus on digital inclusion and kind of social value, which again is part of sort of this whole topic too. So again, there's opportunities there for us to use that interest to kind of talk about the real priorities and stuff where we want ministerial help. But if we don't get that agreed, the risk is that kind of, they go off on a bit of a loose cannon and we don't make the most of that opportunity. So yeah, increasing ministerial interest. At a departmental level, we're getting more and more departments submit that annual report each year that I talked about. EDSA has grown, as we've already heard. So there's a real kind of interest, I think, within the sector in this topic. And yeah, that just, I think, gives us a real opportunity if we can harness it. But if we don't, it's a risk of duplication and confusion. So we want a new strategy to kind of do that, setting priorities and outputs, and kind of why it's important now I've talked about. But I think the key point we want to make about it is that we want this to be a collaborative process and we want people's input as to what needs to be in that strategy. And Lydia Tabron, who is sitting next to Ned there, Lydia, hi, is kind of leading this process. And we're talking to departments and suppliers at the moment about this strategy. But please do come and talk to us today. And as we're going through the day, think about that as we go. Yeah, or get in touch afterwards with your thoughts. But I thought I'd share some emerging themes from our conversations already. So these are some of the kind of main, what we think you're looking like new outcomes from the strategy, where we want to get to in 5 years' time. So the first one around net zero, I think will be familiar to people and continuing that journey. Second one speaks to the circularity point that I mentioned earlier. And as I say, DEFRA Secretary of State is really keen on that and how we can improve not just end user devices, but things like devices we use in our data centers and stuff too, and networking and those kind of things. Third one, I mentioned the planetary impact working group we have earlier, kind of where their work helps us with how we get beyond carbon and think about other measures and other important considerations we need to be thinking about. Fourth one, social value is something that I think people will be familiar with, trying to kind of crowbar in sometimes to procurements and stuff under sustainability. But I think we want to get to a better place in terms of being able to speak the same language and have some agreed priorities around social value and make sure that we're really getting meaningful measures and criteria. The fifth one, again, this, I think DEFRA and also DESNES have got some policy interest in this, and this is about how we get government technology more resilient to climate risk. There was some coverage in the papers a couple of years ago when there was a heat wave about data centers falling over and stuff like that. And I think increasingly we're going to be asked about how we are as government thinking about resilience to climate risk. Then the penultimate one is, at the moment, it's AI that everyone's talking about, but I think increasingly there are going to be other technology innovations that we want to kind of get ourselves ready for. Quantum is starting to be talked about more and more, and there are others that kind of more technology savvy people will have in their minds. But I think in general, we kind of want to be better at getting on the front foot when these things come along, so that kind of people are thinking at the start about sustainability rather than kind of as a after the horse has bolted point. And then the last one is it's a bit policy speak, forgive me, but at the moment it's just to kind of put something in there about how we make sure that this stuff is joined up a bit better. At the moment, we've got a number of departments that have an interest in some of this. We've got DESNES, DEFRA, SIT, and I think there's just a risk that we don't have a kind of consistent way of thinking about not only governments take a state, but kind of how we want the wider UK economy and supply chain to work. So we've got a bit of a challenge around that. So those are some of the themes. Within those, we've got some questions here that, again, these are not definitive, but these are ones that are starting to emerge and we really welcome sort of further thoughts on them. I won't read them all out, but hopefully some of those kind of resonate and show you kind of where we're starting to get some thoughts and views. But as I say, Lydia and I are really happy to take further feedback on these. So just to kind of, and I think probably speaking to a lot of people here that already, are convinced about this point, but Chris always includes these slides. So I felt obliged to speak to them in some context. So why it's important, we've got loads of statistics now about the last decade being the hottest in 125,000 years, CO2 levels rising, deadly heat waves, fastest rise in sea levels and things like that. And the impact of the tech sector in particular, again, people here may be familiar with this, but it's helpful to be reminded of it. I think the IT sector been responsible for more global emissions than aviation and shipping combined. And then the chart on the right is about the amount of e-waste that happens every year and the 6 million tons, and only about a third of that being recycled, which I think globally that also equates to 50 tons of mercury each year that is lost by not being recycled. So some powerful stats about kind of the wider climate crisis and technology's impact on that. And especially for government, I mentioned the annual report that Anna leads on. So you can find this online. I put the link in the top right, people can access. But to kind of summarize government's own CO2 emissions, 260,000 tons estimated last year. Need to caveat that, of course, by saying that there is a lot of work to do on data quality for this. And I mentioned the stuff that Mark's leading on for methodology for Scope 3 in particular. But it's our best estimate, and we're getting better each year. And this is kind of where we are at the moment, 260,000 tonnes of CO2. And e-waste, so an encouraging kind of decline in the overall volumes, but we've got a disappointing reduction in the amount of reuse going on. So in terms of kind of the waste hierarchy, we want to drive up reuse rather than recycling, and still seeing a chunky number in terms of overall tonnage going to landfill each year. I think that equates to certainly, a few tons of government IT goes to landfill, which really doesn't need to happen. So the government is still a kind of big driver of some of this stuff. So hopefully that's given a kind of quick view about how we are organized and what we're working on at the moment, and how you can get involved in what we're doing next, as well as a feel for kind of where our strategy is going. But as I say, we really want people to give us thoughts and feedback on that over today and over the next few weeks and months. I think we'll be hearing more about some of those topics over the course of the day. Again, I would encourage people to think as we go through that about what they're going to take away, what you're going to take away to your own organizations, and finish with the final invitation to get in touch with us. Details there, to find out more at our blog. But yeah, please to kind of get in touch with anything you talked about, and best wishes for an enjoyable conference. Enjoy the day.
If you're happy to take them, I think we've got a few minutes for a couple of quick questions. So there will be a microphone coming round. So do put your hand up. Do tell us who you are and where you're from, if you can as well. We'll try and squeeze a couple in. I'll take the first one from there.
Hi, I'm Ian Booth. I work for the Land Registry. I'm kind of trying to make a start in the department to actually get them thinking about digital sustainability, so that cross-government group is great interest to me. In a way, trying to get ahead of the game a little bit, I'd be interested to know what the initial pushbacks you had were from your department when you were trying to put these policies in place, and how you were able to respond to them.
So I think that's a really, So I'll give some reflections from DEFRA's point of view, but I'm sure that others will have their own perspectives from their department. I think DEFRA is an environmental focused department, so we're probably a bit of an oddity in that respect. I think the biggest challenge we've had is not so much resistance to doing it, it's knowing what to do. So it's us not being able to go to them and give a specific intervention or change we want them to make. So we kind of go with a slightly abstract concept of, can you make your service more sustainable? But when they say, what does that mean? Up until the work that Ned and Guy and stuff have been doing, we've not been able to really just pull out some of the specifics that we want them to change. And there's a wider question probably about getting service owners in government digital to kind of be accountable and know their own services. But I think broadly the pushback has been on specifics, and kind of, if we can give them a few quick and easy things to change that often align with stuff they should be doing anyway for sort of cyber or accessibility or usability, that's been, I think, how we tried to kind of start the conversation. But we're certainly not experts or there yet ourselves, so I'd encourage other people to perhaps go and have a chat with you on how they found it.
We've got time for one more, so let's go there as well.
Hello, Matthew Benjamin from the Office for National Statistics. One of your slides talked about some work that you're doing to look at the level of resourcing around sustainability in digital spaces across departments. I was wondering, to what extent are you also looking at the, I suppose, awareness and education level within those teams alongside that? Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, definitely. Yes. And that was, I think, a slide I kind of skipped over really about some of the emerging questions in the new strategy. So one of the things we're finding as we talk to departments is that cross-government departments resource and structure this work very differently. Some have kind of self-defined teams around it, resource differing levels. Others, it's kind of people's voluntary half of their job sort of thing. And without preempting where we get to on it, I think there's probably something, the strategy around being more consistent around how we do structure teams on this topic. There's also, I think you're right, a broader point around how we upskill those teams, but more widely how we upskill the whole digital department to think about this stuff. And back to the point we just heard about, I think things like architects, software engineers, all those sort of professions, we want really this to become like sort of cyber accessibility, usability. It's something that people just think of as being part of their job. So I think without preempting other conversations, I mean, Ben Tung, I know, has been doing stuff on this. Ishmael to talk about some of the awareness stuff they're doing in DWP. But no, I agree. It's definitely part of the something we'll want to include in the strategy too, yeah.
Well, Tom, thank you for getting the day off to a brilliant start. Thank you very much.